everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Just wanted to let you know that Valentine's Day is coming up, and I know you're thinking flowers, chocolate, jewelry, they're all fine, but why not get your loved one something that truly matters? If you really want to do something meaningful for the woman in your life, think big and grab her tickets to Share the Arrows 2026. It's a one-day gathering led by Allie Beth Stuckey, and there are going to be thousands of Christian women coming together to unapologetically learn about the Bible, worship in a powerful way, and create real, lasting fellowship. It's a kind of experience that refreshes the soul. Mark your calendars. It's Saturday, October 10th, 2026 at the Credit Union of Texas Event Center. Early bird tickets are available right now, and you want to get those because they will sell out. So if you want an easy Valentine's Day gift, make sure to pick up tickets for Share the Arrows 2026 for a woman in your life today. All right, so the boomers are at it again. No, I'm just joking. In this case, it's the most evil Wall Street Journal people you can imagine. The point being is there has a headline recently about the fact that Gen Z can't really afford homes. They can't really afford these big milestones in their life, but they are indulging. They're going out there and they're buying extremely expensive things so they can't own houses. That's right. Gen Z is going and buying rotisserie chicken and juices. No, I'm not kidding. The article actually said that they can't afford the homes, but they are going out to buy fancy juices at luxury grocery stores. And yes, rotisserie chicken. So we moved from millennials can't afford homes because they're actually going to restaurants and buying avocado toast to, yeah, you might be staying home because you don't have any money. Well, you can't really afford the home. You're probably staying in your parents' basement. But also, I see you're over there eating some rotisserie chicken and like canned tuna. You're really living it up. Joining me today to discuss why people can't seem to understand price inflation and why it's devastating the younger population. It's one of your favorite guests. It's the Prudentialist. Matt, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Auron. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, this story is a little tongue-in-cheek. I think they kind of did the headline to get attention. Ultimately, the story's about how these fancy grocery stores are seeing more business. But the point still stands. The fact that you would simply deliver a headline like this ultimately shows the incredible disconnect from both our ruling class and our older generations with the average lived experience. Yep, you got me. Lived experience of young people in the United States, especially those who don't have a ton of way to climb the economic ladder. We see this all over the place that people are having a far more difficult time affording homes. I think the average first-time homebuyer age is creeping up on 40 at this point. In many cases, it's older, depending on your state, like mine down here in Florida. We're seeing the cost of the average new car go to $50,000. Obviously, expenses like college, which were not required for previous generations, or at least were far more affordable if you did avail yourself of them, are now reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars on a regular basis. Healthcare, everything else is just exploding in price. And yet we hear over and over again that the younger generations, they're not willing to work, man. They're not willing to save. They're not willing to, take those critical steps. So I guess I just wanted to have a longer conversation on price inflation, on cost of living, and why so many political operatives, so many journalists, and just people in general seem unable to grasp how difficult this is, how much this is impacting people in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to focus, I think, above all, rather than sort of this gotcha title or it's very funny. I remember growing up that it was always that millennials are killing XYZ industry, while at the same time, millennials were responsible for, their own downfall. It was either, they were spending too much money at Starbucks, or it was avocado toast, making fun of sort of your, debutante California liberal type or hipster, sort of the last bastion of any sort of like emerging white culture that was coming out in the 2010s and so on and so forth. But now that the baton has been passed generationally to Gen Z, the same problems that millennials were facing have gotten worse, and they have been exacerbated in a lot of ways. And while this sort of Wall Street Journal article, which I wish I could archive right now, but archive.today seems to be down, but it's the booming business of luxury grocery stores by Lane Florsheim and Xavi Lieber in the Wall Street Journal that came out a couple of days ago. And it's been hitting the rounds because, like you said, we're being really fancy with our rotisserie chickens that last I checked, you can get a nice Kirkland's rotisserie chicken for like $8 and $5.56 at my Walmart if I wanted to go down and make sure. I even looked it up when we were talking about this article today to make sure that that's how much it cost. Something that I can use for a chicken sandwich or to make chicken soup or chicken pot pie, things that are kind of the staples for a lot of households for, cooking at home. I think that it's kind of funny that this is the same sort of tired trope when it comes to the status of our economy. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that are definitely true when we say things like they spend too much money on XYZ. There's a reason why things like Rocket Money has the same commercial over and over again about overspending on subscriptions and services for things that you don't use anymore that you still are somehow paying for and not being aware of it. Yeah, there's a financial illiteracy problem in the United States, but that doesn't really excuse the fact that there are massive barriers to the sort of American dream that older generations took very much for granted. And overall, I can't help but think of, the last interview that Charlie Kirk did with Tucker Carlson saying that unless conservatives and the older echelons of the American electorate really start to recognize how serious the problems are economically for younger generations, don't be surprised when they start voting for candidates on either side of the aisle that want to have more economic populism and redistribution front and center in their policy line.
Yeah, I want to start out by just ceding a point to those that probably would argue against what we're talking about here. A lot of people in these older generations or, in these prestigious positions will say, oh, well, your generations just aren't willing to work. You're not willing to save. As you say, the spending habits, the financial literacy, these are all problems. And that's how you got here. And look, I want to say, like I said, up front, yes, those are all issues. As you acknowledge, there is a work ethic issue. I have run into this myself, trying to get people to take certain steps that I know are going to be beneficial for them. Yes, there are bad spending habits. Those things are all real. So we're not out here saying no, there's no problems and there's nothing millennials or Gen Z can learn. There's nothing they could do better. They're perfect and it's the system that's the problem. That is not what we're saying here. Like, these are things that young people, yes, they need to work. They need to understand the value of a dollar. They need to be too proud to sit on welfare or be in their parents' basement. Like, these things are critical. So that out of the way, those are real problems. However, a large part of that comes from a couple things. First, there's a lot more financial complexity in the system that used to exist. One of the things that people don't acknowledge when they talk about financial literacy is that there is a certain threshold beyond which the average person is just not going to involve themselves. This is why rich people tend to get richer. It's not just that they work hard, though that's important. It's also that they have access to knowledge and certain resources other people did not have. They are familiar with these financial interactions and products and things that they should be putting themselves into. And the more complex your economy gets, the less time the average working person is going to have to understand that. At this point, you must involve yourself in the stock market just to stay past inflation. That was not always true. And because that's the case, a lot of people who otherwise would not understand the stock market or different complexities of financial instruments, they simply are not going to involve themselves in this mechanism that allows you to outrace inflation. So is there a wise way to invest and use your money that allow you to beat certain aspects of our system? Yes. But the younger people do not know it, and they are too busy. They are not familiar. They don't have the time. They don't have the inclination to ultimately grasp, all of those complexities. There are all these additional traps. There's all the constant interest in turning everything into a streaming service or a live service, a billable thing. So much is no longer owned, but is now an intellectual property or digital property that is charged on a regular basis. These are radical changes. Once you owned a album, of music, you just owned it in the 1970s. There's no need to understand the differences between that and calculate whether or not you are saving money by streaming it instead, having a recurring charge. These things simply didn't exist. And that's just one area in which the fact that property has been dematerialized, has been turned into something digital and recurring as a subscription, as opposed to something that is physical and held and owned. That's a big change. But there's a far larger problem that is simply not being addressed here. And that's because when young people see that there's simply nothing that can be obtained, when they see a system that is mostly rigged against them and very difficult to overcome, they are just far less likely to participate in that. Now, individually, that's a bad decision. Ultimately, the good advice is get together, clean up your room, individual action, make a difference, be responsible. But when we zoom out to the macro, when we're not just talking to our friend and tell them, hey, be better with your finances, when we're actually talking about how to address societal problems, we have to recognize that this is a huge issue and that the motivation is to just not involve yourself. When you know that private companies are buying up houses to increase the value and ensure that you have to become a renter for the rest of your life, you're just less likely to try to save money to buy a house. When you know that a new car is just entirely out of reach, you're far more likely to spend your money on, frivolities, because there's just no chance you're ever going to acquire that more reasonable and more reliable form of transportation. These are just things that people are not going to invest in long term when the chances are extremely low. And we can say, oh, well, that's a bad decision and you should do it anyway. I guess, but when people don't play the lottery because they're unlikely to win, we don't call that choice irrational. And more for young people, financial success feels like the lottery. It feels like something that they cannot necessarily achieve through proper planning. Again, this is not to say that everybody doesn't make it, that everybody can't achieve it. But in many ways, I feel like I caught the last chopper out of Nam. I bought a house in my late 30s, right? Which is that new average home buyer age. Now, I was able to do that because of some success and some help, and because of my own responsible behavior. But if I had waited just a few years later, that house would have been completely unaffordable. Like, I would have never been able to buy it. So even in my situation where I had assistance, I did the right thing, I was successful, even in that moment, it still would have been out of reach if it had happened just a few years later. And I have many friends who are in a similar situation like mine, but they waited a few more years and now they're just completely locked out of the housing market. So it's one of those scenarios where, yes, you can make it, but it's such a thinner margin of success that people are just unmotivated to take those actions.
Yeah, and I think that one of the bigger things that comes out of that is not just as the average age of the first-time home buyer, according to the National Association of Realtors in 2025, was a record high of 40. It was 38 in 2024. It was 35 in 2023. But in 1981, the average age of a first-time home buyer was 29 years old. And that person was more than likely to be married and in that sort of situation. Whereas in the United States, it is a much more complicated picture in 2025 when we look at home ownership and employment outcomes for the average American family under the age of 35. Because anyone who is under 35, like you had mentioned, Auron, it is very difficult to get on there. And it's kind of funny. I was having a conversation just the other day where every generation has their new last chopper out of Vietnam kind of story. And now everyone's saying they got the last plane out of Afghanistan. And the way that they describe themselves when they get married or manage to get a new car or afford a home or have some modicum of financial success is they do describe it like winning a lottery or getting out of a war zone. Because when we take a look at let's say with under 25s, single male householders, it's about 24%. Single female householders, about 19%. Married households, of course, have the obvious advantage at 32.2% of all under 25s in America when it comes to that sort of age. And it's not just housing either that's gotten more expensive. I mean, when we take a look at the average price of a used car, we can see that ranges anywhere from $25,000, depending on what year, make, and model it is. But even finding one and trying to play by the rules with the Kelley Blue Book and everything else, it finds itself really hard to find a quality car that will get you to where it is. And I'm not saying that people aren't going to make the incorrect choice and not swallow their pride and maybe take the beater and drive that into the ground until they can afford something better. But overall, it's a really terrible situation when, we're seeing this sort of obvious bait headline talking about rotisserie chicken, of all things, being the sort of way in which we're spending too much money. A lot of the problems, I think, do come from the over financialization of everything. There, like you mentioned, everything is as some kind of as a service or a live service product or a subscription, the physical ownership of your own materials, mediums, when it comes to our forms of technology, music, etc. That doesn't, stay with us the same way as that it used to be. That triggered kind of this analog renaissance a few years ago, especially in the 2010s. But when we look at everything now, the affordability crisis attacks all fronts. And so often, looking for a guide or someone to assist you can become quite difficult, because online, obviously, the intergenerational spats that we have every now and then, they seem to be this annual thing where we're either hating the boomers or we're hating millennials and Gen Z, and it's a never-ending back and forth. Despite the fact that there is a lot of institutional knowledge and know-how that we could probably take advantage of one from another, and sort of this nice, what used to be part of the public space or the body politic where we could talk about these things and engage with it. But because things have drastically gotten so much more expensive, America is not the nation it was that the boomers grew up in. There is no sense of trust or anything. The cyberpunk dystopia certainly feels like it's here for quite a number of millennials and Gen Z Americans. And what are you supposed to do about that? And so a lot of people will have this attitude that, well, there is no hope. I don't see myself ever getting a hold of Social Security, so why not just live it up and enjoy this status of minimalism, or have a small millennial gray colored apartment and just enjoy the little small creature comforts that I have, because any sense of greater financial and economic success has been taken from me. There is a sense of victimhood status that comes with that, but also at the same time, there is very identifiable factors in play here that we've discussed and that countless others have written about, that really do highlight the difficulties of affordability or achieving a modicum of the American dream that my parents or your parents had a much easier time attaining.
And I want to make it clear that this isn't just a generational issue. We will talk more about some of the advantages and concerns and confusion between the generations. But this is also a huge, just neoliberal economic issue, right? Like this is, I was in a debate on Break the Rules with some guy who he's friends with like Steven Pinker. He's one of these, moderate leftist abundance guys. And don't worry, everything's been getting better. Enlightenment now. We're all making more money. It's all going to be great. And when you talk to these guys, it's like they're completely just checked out, right? Like they won't acknowledge the fact that so much of the economic numbers have been cooked in order to give this appearance that kind of these open borders, free trade, relentless financialization process. It has no downsides. It's all upsides. Look, the numbers go up. I've seen the GDP go up. It must be true. Everyone's living a better life, but no one's asking the classic Carlylean question: that what is the condition of England? Like, what is the condition of the lives of the people who are making more money when you actually look at what's going on? And when you recognize that, okay, well, yes, my big screen TV has gone down in price. I get one much cheaper than they used to be 10 years ago. But everything I need to live, the actual, the food, the insurance, the housing, the education, all of these things have skyrocketed in price. You recognize that actually it's the luxury spending that's become easier. Ironically, the things that people are being mocked for consuming, these luxury goods, those things have become more affordable. But the day-to-day stuff, the things that they can't actually get off the ground with, those have become exponentially more expensive. And this is the real problem. So you have, I remember this was a pivotal moment in my political formation, so much so that this is one of the earliest videos I did on this channel. But I talked about the Ben Shapiro paradox, when Ben Shapiro had that debate with Tucker Carlson like a decade ago, I think, at this point, which seems like another lifetime, when Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson would have sat down and had a friendly discussion on any given issue. But in that debate, I don't know if you remember, but Tucker Carlson took the side of, no, we must protect American jobs. And Ben Shapiro said, no, we ship them overseas. If they get automated, they get automated. Creative destruction. Just that kind of classic, economic argument we've heard, over and over again. And Tucker Carlson says, no, I'd blow every one of them up if it allows a trucker to pay for his house and take care of his kids and feed his kids. And at that time, I was much more on the Ben Shapiro side. But the more I thought about what Tucker Carlson said, the more I realized he was absolutely right. And that just kind of radically changed how I understood the economic situation. And so we have this constant denial that, yes, okay, technically, these things have gotten cheaper in certain areas. Yes, it might look like we're creating and generating more economic activity. But we know that behind the scenes, just none of this is true. If only for the fact that we recognize things like, okay, an Indian guy comes over here in an H-1B, and it turns out that he is more eligible to get a loan, like a discounted loan to start a business, than I am as an American. As if a Gen Z guy or a millennial guy wants to buy a home or start a business or go to college, it's harder for them to get access to funds than it is for illegal immigrants. Like, that's where we are. That's how our system is currently created. And so there's just this complete denial. And of course, there's also the inflation question. Someone looks at someone making $100,000 a year and they think, oh, that's an amazing salary. When I was in the 1980s, $100,000 could buy you basically anything you wanted. Now you recognize, no, that's not even going to get you through the door. When the average new car is $50,000, well, that used to be like a Corvette. Now that's a Toyota Camry if you're lucky. And so now you have this issue where you're going to spend more than half of your given salary, even if that's supposed to be some kind of good salary, just to buy a car in 1 year. Same thing goes with housing and food and medical care. The inflation just keeps skyrocketing. The wages don't keep pace, but for some reason, the people in charge, especially older generations, they have this price memory of, oh, well, $100,000 used to be a fortune, so it still is, as if nothing has changed. You think this would be pretty simple. Conservatives are supposed to be very good at math, and in a lot of situations, supposed to be the rational people, the people who care about sound finance. And yet when you bring up stuff like this, they just stare at you like you've grown a third head. It's very strange.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you consider, the purchasing power is one of the biggest ones. There are a lot of conflicting numbers or exact calculations. Some say that in the last 30 years, the US dollar's lost 53% of its purchasing power. And I mean, if you compare it even to just 2020, some would say that that's even worse, that, $100 in 2020 is roughly about $75 to $80 today. So just already from the pandemic, we have already lost a significant portion of our purchasing power, but prices have also gone up by about 25% at the same time. So keeping up with inflation and keeping up with the general cost of living has been an incredible strain on the average American, especially when we look at how much the average, the medium take-home weekly earnings are. I mean, for salaried workers, that's about, $1,300 for white men, about $1,100 for white women, and it's roughly the same for the rest of the demographic breakdown here in the United States as well, at least for salary. And then it's about $805 for hourly workers a week, and $725 for women for ages 16 to 24. And so when you're looking at that, and then depending on where you live, a good chunk of that might be going to rent. A good chunk of that might be going to your car payment or your insurance or your own health insurance, if you have that, either provided by your employer or you're finding some sort of private option. Those things begin to stack up, and it becomes incredibly difficult. And like you mentioned at the beginning, Auron, you're then forced to look at other means of making an income. And I think this is where you saw the rise, of course, of the gig economy, people taking on more than one job in order to afford just their basic necessities. And of course, again, this doesn't, absolve anyone from poor financial decisions or going into debt or anything like that. But I mean, for the person who's trying to play the game or play into the system as they have been raised and told to do, it becomes increasingly difficult. And we saw this on the American left about a decade ago at this point, where you had individuals like Andrew Yang discuss the idea of universal basic income. You had Bernie Sanders, of course, about Medicare for all, and even at one point in time talking about immigration as a way to suppress wages. Doesn't really do that anymore. So at the end of the day, it's not like a univariate analysis that we can provide. There's not one singular root cause to this issue. But when we take a look at how these things all come together, inflation, our monetary system, the policies that we've been putting in place to sort of dramatically make it harder for the average American to have access to homes or things that we would once consider affordable, basic home goods, means that, even a rotisserie chicken is now considered a luxury item. overall, or and it really does, generate, of course, I think a sense of resentment a lot of amongst younger people, but even those that are like myself who are I'm in my 30s, like, I'm doing everything that I can, working two jobs outside of just doing this on the internet, to make money and to save up for a nest egg to one day hopefully to be able to afford a home in my mid to late 30s, because that's what I want to be able to do with the family that I want to have. And I think that that's again where you're looking at yourself and seeing, okay, maybe these orthodoxies that we've been raised on don't necessarily work. And we need to be looking at alternatives for that. And I think right now that's sort of been the big political moment. I think that's a big reason why Donald Trump had managed to spring success and saw significant overlap in the 2016 election. I think it was about 10% of Bernie Sanders supporters in the Midwest went for him in 2016. And the fact that we saw the economy just stagnate, we saw the literal definition of a recession change before our lying eyes under the Biden admin, that, yeah, I think it was time that we put the guy who made things affordable and made things good for the country to be back in office, let alone the Biden administration tanked our strategic petroleum reserves while everything was still going on with the Houthis and Yemen. All these things come to play a role that the average American has been, as our friends across the pond like to say, we are all Nick, 30 years old, and we are being drained financially to pay for pensioners. We're being drained to pay for ongoing wars all across America and all across the world. We're being drained of our money financially, to pay for immigrant health care for people who shouldn't even be here to begin with. That stupid, app that was out during the Biden administration to allow millions of people who are now unaccounted for to come into this country, and that we're only now just beginning to deport. And, this is a financial, this is a relationship that nobody wanted, nobody consented to, and are looking for ways out. Because, again, that level of political and social exhaustion that exists for people like myself and even younger than me is really just, I don't think people really recognize, especially in our elite institutions or those who work for the Wall Street Journal. I don't think they know how bad it is. There is an ivory tower that is very much there. And when I talk to people who are younger than me, and I know that you've done the same, Auron, we've been to similar conferences and circles. Every Gen Z guy I know who has these concerns is harder working and is more dedicated to their job, their family, their God, and their country than probably their like conservative or right-wing millennial counterpart. Because yes, things were bad for ourselves, but there's a lot more things that are even worse for them that are not being acknowledged by anyone there, except for a few screaming voices in the wilderness in the Trump administration and those that are outside of it looking at this from a market perspective. And to sort of wrap all of this up, when we're talking about the average rate of home ownership, the increasing prices of even being able to afford a used car, down to basic goods and services, it begs the question of where is this money going and how are we doing and what are we doing with it? And that sort of brings us almost full circle to, the Tea Party and Occupy from, 15, almost what feels like, a lifetime ago.
Yeah. And I should say, guys, this is not live. I am traveling. So if you have questions, please know that we won't be able to answer them at the end. I appreciate your support, but we won't be able to do audience questions, obviously. And yeah, I think it's so important because, you talked about that first just roaring Trump economy, right? And it was far better than Biden. But we look at then what happened, obviously, with COVID. What was the justification for shutting down the world economy for years? The answer was, well, we don't want to kill the old people. You got to protect the older generation. So you watched Gen Zers and millennials, completely just put their life on hold, their money making, their ability to build wealth and security, all under the auspices that this will, save grandma, and that's why we're doing this. And ultimately, we know that the borders remained open during that time, so there's just no serious interaction with like the policies and what we're actually doing and how they economically impact people. And now the question is, does the economy ever recover from that post-COVID hit? Even though I think the economy is doing better under Trump, will it ever reach those heights? After that kind of difficulty, we also look at the fact that even if Donald Trump does, take big steps, the affordability crisis is going to be huge, right? Like that's going to continue to be a massive problem, and there's just not a good answer to this issue because one of the core problems is inflation, and the problem is that right now Trump wants the interest rates low because he wants people to be able to take out loans and buy homes and buy cars and those things. But that artificially holding those interest rates low is also just turbocharging the inflation that already occurred after the money printer went burr during the COVID and all the bailouts and all of the the stimulus checks and everything else we tried to do to keep the country afloat while we shut down the economy. The chickens come home to roost. Like, we're going to have to pay those bills. And the problem with the inflated money is that there is just no incentive to stop. Like, no president wants to have a bad economy or a slower economy so that they can tame inflation. They're going to continue to print out of control because there's really no other option. We've addicted ourselves to cheap money. There's no way that we can pay off our government debt without inflating our way out of it. And even then, I don't know that we can ever do that. And so we have this incentive structure where even the people who pretend to care about sound fiscal decisions and monetary policy have no real incentive to follow through on their promises there. And so you have a situation where both sides have kind of had a tacit agreement where, like, we're just going to inflate until the whole thing just goes off the rails. And we're never going to do anything about that because doing something about that would hurt our political chances. So one of the wonders of democracy is, making the responsible decision will basically destroy you politically. So they're just never going to do that. So we have a scenario where both sides are angry about the different aspects of the consequences of our monetary policy, but neither of them will ever do anything to stop it. So our entire political battle now is basically two sides who have no interest in fixing the problem, arguing with each other about who's responsible for the impact of the policies they're both embracing. And that's a scenario where there is just no win. And young people look at that and maybe they can't articulate every aspect of that political conundrum, but they see the impact and they see that there's no way they're ever going to get ahead. And there's no way that they're ever going to have a dollar that's worth something. They're never going to have a currency that holds value and doesn't just get inflated into oblivion immediately. That's why so many young people are looking at things like crypto and those kind of things, because it's better to play the crypto lottery than just invest into a dollar system is never going to pay out for you. So it just feels like there's just this crabs in the bucket thing where anyone who even tries to escape this is eventually going to get pulled down by the weight of those social systems that you were talking about. Ultimately, you can't get ahead because not only are you supporting all of these people that are ultimately, relying on you to keep the economy afloat, sorry, but also you're just never going to get ahead because the fact that the very currency you would earn is going to betray you at every moment. The very policy of the government is to make the money you would make basically less valuable as a mechanism for buying the votes of older generations and foreigners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, you see where that intergenerational hatred or fracas or whatever you really want to call it emerges out of, because obviously the American electorate is disproportionately older. They're the ones that have the time to get politically involved and investigate. They're disproportionately whiter than the younger generations are, of course, due to mass immigration. They were not affected by it in the way that we were, although they did witness a great chunk of what would come. And of course, they voted against it, despite what our government tends to do on that issue. But I mean, when you look at how it's been going, I mean, we saw the same thing earlier today when it came to taxation. We want to call this like a working families tax credit, but oftentimes it's rewarding those that are older. I just saw a lovely photo of Nancy Mace, saying no taxes on boats, as if most millennials and anyone under the age of 35 is going to own a boat at all, maybe outside of like a rinky-dink thing that you might use to go fishing on like a family pond or someplace local, but nothing where it's going to be like a large yacht where you can have a boat party or anything like that. And if you do, then congratulations, you're much more wealthier than I am. But it really does come to show that the electorate, of course, and the donor class is of an older generation that has wealth, that wants to maintain it and hold on to it as long as possible. And in numerous parts of the country, it's reflected in the state of its economy. There are these little parts of America that I like to call them necro economies, where it's basically the most wealthy and high paying job in that area is in the healthcare sector. because all that you're really doing is keeping an aging population alive and maintaining their issues and whatever health problems that come as we get older. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad that that stuff exists. We shouldn't be leaving our elderly to die. I don't want to sanction them off to some kind of euthanasia or quietus or anything like that. But
I'm going to put them on the ice flow.
yeah, I was just rereading for the first time in years, Auron, P.D. James's novel, The Children of Men. And I really recommend that people read the book rather than watch the god-awful film adaptation that was made several years ago. But, that's the thing, is that the dissidents that rebel against the warden of Great Britain, one of the things that concerns them is, of course, what it is, putting them out on the ice floe, the ceremonial drowning of the elderly, which is nothing ceremonial at all, and it's often just bloody, awful murder. And it's funny because that's a world wherein, what do you do when there is no future and that we're all going to slowly pewter away? And when you're, of course, thinking about your own mortality, you want to do everything that you can to preserve it because that's the natural human impulse, is to keep on living. But at the same time, we've deprived ourselves culturally, I think, of this teleological impulse to leave something behind for the next generation. That always used to be the thing that was in front and foremost of all European nations, and of course in America as well, for ourselves and our posterity. And we don't really have that idea anymore. So often do we see the usual clickbait of some celebrity or some billionaire saying that they're not leaving anything behind for their children. How true that may actually be remains to be seen, but it's a growing trend where people are like, well, I've got mine, so you can do the same things that I did and you'll be fine, either deliberately unaware and choosing to remain in ignorance, or knowing full well how bad things are and they simply don't care at all, which is absolute malice. But on this issue of affordability and the overall state of things, that becomes the core question in the that for the Children of Men, is the question of hope and belief, because things have to get better, or we have to hope that they do, or that someone is going to help us tear this system down. Because I think that the vitriol on both sides for voters and young people, regardless of political affiliation, is that everyone feels that the game is rigged against them, despite the fact that the game is very much only really rigged against one set of people. And that if the system is going to continue to go like this in perpetuity, why don't I just be like Samson and tear everything down and take it with me? The anger and the desire to actually take action and do something is going to continue to see all kinds of radical actions being taken, more radical positions that are so far from America's political orthodoxy that there'll be proposals in place that the American polity is not designed to really handle or do. And at the same time, we've already seen what that'll look like on the left. You have the Luigi Mangionis of the world. There have been countless others like him that either endorse his behavior or have tried to do it themselves. And of course, there is that very political action. We saw this too, where you mentioned crypto earlier. I mean, just a few years ago, in the height of the COVID pandemic, a very real political act was all of the GameStop stuff with their stocks and trying to do everything about it because they wanted to punish the owner of the company and to make sure that they didn't get a bonus, and to try to do their best that that he was going to lose money while they tried their best to make money. And those kinds of political actions through the wallet are going to continue to happen, I think, as we saw the run on silver. We've seen how expensive RAM is nowadays due to NVIDIA, and how really the only parts of the economy right now are constantly trying to hype themselves up, especially with artificial intelligence, saying like, listen, this is how big things are going to be. Please invest in us and give us more money. While at the same time, OpenAI hasn't turned a profit or hasn't made any money. I know it's got its nonprofit status, and it's currently dealing with that whole issue with Elon Musk. But overall, the state of the economy does not feel good for anyone under the age of 30. And it leaves people in a very bleak position. And it's very funny that while all of this is happening, there's this debate that I know that you've engaged with with fellow, Blaze members over the issue of like the arts and patronage. But really the question is going to be, where are the patrons or the people that concern themselves with the future of the country? Gen X and older, that genuinely see how bad the plight is of their fellow citizens, their countrymen, and should be moving towards how do we change it or make things better. I know people like that in my real life communities that are more concerned about those things. But overall, Auron, it really does seem that the vitriol and the extremism will continue to rise as things get worse. And I don't think that the electorate knows, or the older parts of the electorate know, or more or less they probably don't care either, because they won't be here when that finally kettle comes to boil and whistle, or they do know and they're deliberately trying to trigger something to happen. But that's a conspiratorial discussion for another time.
Yeah, there's the old African proverb that goes something like, the young man who is ignored by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And you have this scenario where a lot of, again, the kind of the entitled class, the Wall Street Journal, class, or some of the older classes, they want to look at the young people and say, well, you're just going to figure it out, and you're bad and dumb for not getting it done. And again, like, I'm not justifying any dropping out, not participating, not trying, or getting revolutionary, any of those things. But you have to understand these things happen for a reason. Like, the French Revolution was horrific, but it happened in part because the king really was making bad decisions. The Russian Revolution was an absolute nightmare, but it did happen because the Tsar was not doing a good job and was ignoring the needs of the people. Like, ultimately, you can't just assume that society is this engine that just runs on its own and people can choose to succeed in it or not. You have to recognize that ultimately, God forgive me here, but you live in a society. Like, you ultimately do have to care about the people next to you. You have to care about involving the people next to you. You have to, the systems you're operating have to benefit most of the people involved, because if they don't, there will eventually come a time where everyone either checks out or decides that they don't want to play this game anymore, and whatever is better than what they have now. Now, they're usually wrong about that. Like I said, the French Revolution was worse. The Russian Revolution was much worse. But there does come a point where people are willing to take that chance because the system has become so sclerotic, so locked in, so disadvantageous to them that they have a hard time imagining the worst, even if it really is out there and they really will involve them. And so you can't just sit there and say, well, you're going to figure it out. You got to figure it out. Yes, that is good advice to the individual. Again, I will, if any one person comes to me and says, how do I improve my life? Work harder. Make sure, you're taking care of yourself. You're increasing your skill set. You're putting your time in. You're making wise financial decisions. You're learning about investments. You're learning about, I'm going to give them all of that individual advice. But when we're talking to entire generations or entire classes of people, there has to be a way that these things benefit everyone. You can't keep running the entire economy for boomers and the laptop class. You can't keep shipping, the average person's job overseas and tell them to just learn to code. There has to be a buy-in, or eventually people will get violent or apathetic. And you can't be angry or surprised when that ultimately happens. We're looking at scenarios, as you pointed out, where we're adjusting taxes to help the people who have already received the most. I mean, down here in Florida, we're talking about getting rid of property tax. Let me tell you, I hate property tax. I can't wait to not pay property tax. But I'm also aware that most of the people in Florida who own properties are old. Like, they're older generations. And so when you get rid of the property tax, you don't just stop paying taxes. The money comes from somewhere. So it's not coming from the older people who own their homes. Where does it come from? Well, it's going to come from the younger people. It's going to be a consumption tax of some kind, or it's going to be some other tax that's going to disproportionately hit younger generations. And as much as I hate paying property tax, I have to care about the people that come after me. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not just here to like spend every dollar before the lights go out. That's not the purpose of my life. And we have to get back to a mentality where we're running the country for the interests of the entire nation, not just for a globalist elite that's going to profit off this stuff, or from a retirement class that's ultimately going to be able to survive off of the largesse of previous generations and not have to deal with the consequences. We've got to care. Like, we have to lower our time preference. We have to think about how we can benefit the entire society. And that means that, some people might take a hit. It means that they might not have the cheapest labor. It means they might have to, pay the taxes that everybody else pays. Like, you might not just get to check out on those responsibilities, and you have to be okay with every single thing not benefiting you. And again, I don't want to just preach to the boomers. It's not just there are plenty of great, boomers. My parents are, generous, kind people who, have not taken that route. It's not just saying, oh, everyone in this age bracket is a problem. It's, like I said, it's also the neoliberal set. It's the globalist set. It's the laptop class. who are running economies just for their benefit. But we have to see something change. We have to stop getting these Wall Street Journal articles, because I commented under this and in the Twitter, and it ratioed them quite savagely. But it's like, when Gen Z comes to roast you in the street and eat you, I will not feel bad for you. You will have earned every bit of it. When you become the rotisserie chicken, you will have earned exactly what you got. And I just don't think these people understand. They think, oh, it can't happen in America. It can't happen in America. Oh, it can absolutely happen in America. And you guys really have to get a hold of your just insane greed and your dismissal of everyone else's problems. I go ahead and start wrapping this up, but I guess the last thing I'll say before I throw it back to you is, the affordability issue is going to be the issue. It just is. Like, that and immigration are going to be 1 and 2 for probably the next 10 years at least. And so any Republican administration, any Trump administration, any let's hope JD Vance administration, they're going to have to address this problem. You've got to figure out a way to make a serious impact on this problem. If you do not, you're going to lose power. You're just going to lose power, and you can sell everything else, right? We had Pam Bondi out there saying, "Oh, Dow is above this point, so I don't want to hear about any other issues." Okay, but most people aren't benefiting from the Dow being up, and they're seeing you drop the ball on things like Jeffrey Epstein. So the things that you're even using to placate them don't work for them, because we have a good economy. A good economy for who? Not for the average worker. You mean a good economy for people like you, people who don't do real jobs, who don't have to pay real bills, who would be fine no matter what. They're seeing their stock prices go up. They're seeing their assets inflate. But that's not helping the people who have to buy homes, who are watching those assets deflate and then can't buy them. These are just mentality shifts that have to occur for us to have a political future as conservatives, as right-wingers. And by the way, it's also just the moral thing to do. You're supposed to be a conservative. You're supposed to be right-wing. You're supposed to recognize the importance of generations and family, and you're doing everything to destroy the possibility of those things continuing. So I'll just give you the last word on that, Prudentialist.
Yeah, sure. In 2002, Pat Buchanan wrote The Death of the West. And it's very much, Pam Bondi during that hearing, mentioned the Dow hitting, 50,000. And on that issue, Pat Buchanan wrote this: "With the Democratic Party so beholden to feminism that it cannot even oppose partial birth abortions, and the GOP enthralled to a libertarian ideology and controlled by corporate interests, the call of the gods of the marketplace for more women workers prevails over the command of God to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Many conservatives have succumbed to the heresy of economism, a mirror Marxism that holds that man is an economic animal and that free trade and free markets are the path to peace, prosperity, and happiness, that if we can only get the marginal tax rates right and the capital gains tax abolished, paradise, the Dow at 36,000, is at hand. But when the income tax rate for the wealthiest was above 90% in the 1950s, America, by every moral and social indicator, was a better country." He wrote this, over 20 years ago, and it still, I think, rings rather true to this day, that it's very clear that interests that are far more powerful and wealthier than us are beholden to the country, that every nation on earth feels like America is a dumping ground and a refuse for its citizens and its immigrants to come here and to, of course, lessen workers and wages. I was at my bachelor party dinner a couple of days ago, and more or less about all of the table, had to kind of take a sip of their drink to not say anything when the discussion about our jobs came up, because one of the guys there talks about how someone that he works with rather closely at his own office, his job is to look for ways in which to offshore and to find call center work that is not inside the United States. And, I'm very glad that we moved on from that discussion quickly, because after dinner, quite a few of us were, talking outside the restaurant. And it's I hope I never find that guy, because I don't think he would walk away, without going to the hospital or something. And, when you're hearing that from people that are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, the nativist sentiment that is very, I think natural, and it is the right inclination for Americans to have, is to be concerned about their nation first, to put America first, economically, socially, morally, religiously. When we live in a society where that's not really taking place, and that the younger people have been alienated and deracinated from their heritage by mass immigration and cultures that are not their own. And while at the same time being, subject to political and economic illiteracy that has only allowed them to engage in a system of subscription services writ large, as well as basically gambling, either literally gambling over college and national football, or gambling with the stock market or with crypto, that you have more or less literally have, truly, decided to castrate the geldings and bid them to be fruitful, at least in this economic sense. And again, like you had said, those issues, immigration, the economy, and affordability, will be the issues going forward. And I can guarantee you, as a prediction right now, later this year in 2026, affordability will be front and center. The left will argue, very moderately on their rhetoric about economic populism, but they will vote to the left of Mao every time if they get into office. While at the same time, Republicans will try and do the same and focus on immigration, those issues like that. And don't get me wrong, the New York Times was right that Donald Trump has an answer to everything, and that issue is immigration. That one has to be solved first. In order for any political project on the right to succeed, there are 4 reinstitutionalizations that need to happen. Remigration, reenchantment, re-evangelization, and reinstauration. If you're not willing to establish all 4 of those things, where Americans feel the wonder and the beauty of what God has given them on this country, given them the faith to believe that they can leave something to go on, remigrate and patriotically send and repatriate millions of people who shouldn't be here to begin with back to their respective countries of origin, and at the same time reinstall some law and order and some former greatness that has been in decline for so many years. If those 4 things aren't put in place for any political project, then we're going to see a million more articles about rotisserie chickens at the same rate that we're going to see millions of more foreigners eat the cats and dogs off of our streets.
Thank you for once again reminding us that Pat Buchanan is just right about everything all the time. And if we just listened to him, we would be in a much better place. Matthew, where should people find your great work?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Prudentialist. Just look for the lovely frog on that screen that you see when you're on twitter.com. You can find me on Substack and YouTube as well. I recently put out a new video called That Sickness Unto Nostalgia, where I give a review of P.D. James's novel, The Children of Men, the conversation about where our children's spaces are, and that very question about those sort of 4 re-institutionalizations that would lead to some sort of right-wing and American victory for any political project going forward. So as always, Auron, thank you so much for having me on. And I hope that everyone else enjoyed this discussion, and do not stop eating your rotisserie chicken. It's like $5. It's really good to cook with. Don't let them tell you otherwise.
That's right. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up. Once again, we are not live, so sorry, but we cannot take your questions. But if you are on YouTube for the first time watching this channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell notifications so you know when we go live, if we're going live. And of course, if you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you can just subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do, leave a review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.